That's it.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of Housing Developers of Builders of Canada Meetup series. So excited to be here. Can't believe it's April. Already 4 months gone in the year. It's unbelievable. Time flies. It's crazy. It's unbelievable. So yeah, just happy to have everyone here. Really excited for another session. We have a very special guest tonight, Mr. Ryan Carr from Ryan Carr Investments. You're probably familiar with him. We'll get into introductions a little bit later. For those who are first time here, welcome to the group. I'll run through a few housekeeping stuff. So first and foremost, disclaimer. So the information provided in this meeting is for educational and general information purpose only and does not constitute investment or professional advice or offering of securities. HDBC Group and myself, Ali Nazarian, do not endorse any products, persons, or investment opportunities. Participants are responsible for obtaining independent legal, accounting, and financial advice from licensed professionals before making any investment decisions. If everybody could mute themselves, that would be great. I'm actually gonna, yeah, okay, it should be good now. All right, for those who are not familiar with the HDBC group, this is a group I started in a Facebook group. I started in February 2021 to foster conversations and sharing of ideas, resources, and knowledge among those involved in land development and building houses in Canada from beginner to seasoned. It was really because I was, growing in that space and I just couldn't find any resources online. A lot of Facebook groups, they're always talking about flips and, duplex conversions and whatnot, but there was not a lot of information about development and building houses. So I was like, you know what, I'll just start one. And can't believe it's more than 2 years now. We have more than 1,600 members now in the Facebook group. Obviously not everybody is active, but this meetup has been going on for over a year now. It started in January 2022. So thanks for all your support and for showing up to these monthly events. And for those who are watching the recording later, thanks for continuing to be part of the group. So a little bit about myself. Obviously, my name is Ali Nazarian. I'm a real estate investor, developer, and coach. I have a passion for growth, creativity, and sustainability. I started investing myself in 2016. I was involved in families real estate investing a little bit before that. But yeah, my own journey started in 2016. And my first development project was in 2017. I started researching about in 2014, 2015, but I finally pulled the trigger in 2017. And at the same time, I founded Ecolux Developments with the goal of developing and building energy efficient residential buildings. I'm a mechanical engineer by background, so I always had a passion for building energy efficiency and whatnot. So I wanted to incorporate that into home building. And I've done project management, engineering, and risk management, which really helps me as an investor. And for those who are familiar, I've joined Wealth Genius as a coach recently as well. And so next, speaking of Wealth Genius, so Land Development Bootcamp, this one is actually sold out, but there is a wait list. So if you're interested, I'll put the link after I'm done talking in the chat, and you guys can use the code to get a discount. Also coming up, actually very shortly, is the Wealth Genius Real Estate Expo. So the land development, Karina will be there. If you're interested in the other topics, there's a few other guests added to this list now as well. So again, I'll put the link and the code in the chat, and you don't want to miss this one. This is going to be a big one. So now, Ryan Carr, I'm sure you all have heard about him. He's the author of this book, The Highest and Best Use. He's known for that term. He's really coined that and made that a brand, which is awesome. He's a full-time real estate investor. He's from GTA, specializes in finding the highest and best use for real property. He's also a coach. And so I won't go into too much detail. And without further ado, I'll pass it to the man. Ryan, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Ali. Much appreciated. Do you have the slide deck there in the screen?
Put that up.
Okay. So in the meantime, hey, everybody. Good to meet everybody. I'm Ryan Carr. Really excited to be out here tonight with HDBC. It's funny. I came across this group like, Ali, how long ago was it? Maybe like 6 months, a year?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Probably a year.
And it was kind of funny because it was the same thing that you had a hard time finding people to chat about this with and finding information. And then you came up with this group and then people just appear,
Yeah.
and then this somehow appeared on my Facebook and here we are. So, I mean, I really like that. So thank you for building on. Thanks to Mary for putting all this on behind the scenes. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Connected over that same conversations where I was looking for information on Facebook, and we were when I was recording the podcast with you, we were trying to remember where we connected, but I think it was about about 2 years ago or 2021.
Something like that, yeah.
Probably commented on each other's posts. So it's awesome. Yeah.
I love it.
Thanks for being here. You're a wealth of knowledge, and thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I'm sure everybody's excited to hear about your background. So maybe you start with that. Just give us a little background. How did you get started in real estate, and how did you grow, and how did you discover this theme of highest and best use?
Yeah, so highest and best use really came about over the last number of years. It just kind of came naturally. I didn't even know what the term meant earlier in my career. I've been investing since 2012, and I didn't even know what the term meant. And then all of a sudden it kind of came to fruition, and it came to my mind that hey, everything that I'm doing with my deals already really has the essence of the highest and best use built into it. And the way that I describe highest and best use, at least in my opinion, is the most profitable, productive, or efficient way to get something done somehow. That really held through to help me optimize my portfolio over the years. And as such, I started bringing this idea of highest and best use to the forefront of what we all know and see and stuff that I plaster all over social media whenever I can. Obviously, Ali, thanks for the shout out for the book. I wrote a book called The Highest and Best Use Playbook, Finding the Unfair Advantage Over Your Real Estate Competition. And that was a really fun one to write. I also have a podcast called the Highest and Best Use Real Estate Podcast that Ali was a guest on, and his episode will come out this summer. Just like a super good wealth of knowledge, really smart guy. And again, I'm really excited to be here. So we're going to talk tonight about strategic land planning. Specifically, I want to talk about easements. Easements are a thing that not a lot of people speak about in the market, especially in the duplex, triplex flipping market. Nobody talks about easements. So I'm going to bring that to the forefront tonight. This is actually the first time that I've ever run this presentation at all. So it's a fresh slide deck for you guys. So we're going to go through it together. From what I understand, there are people of varying degrees of sophistication in the group. So there's people who are just getting started, which is awesome. I love that. There's people who are absolutely brilliant and probably know some of the stuff already. So I'm going to try to take it relatively quickly, but then also slow down for the parts that might get a little bit technical so that everybody can appreciate what we're going to talk about. Specifically for easements and right-of-ways, what we're going to get into tonight, just before we kick it off, is related to triplexes. So obviously with Bill 23, everybody's heard about Bill 23 by now. Bill 23 basically allows 3 units on a parcel where you could previously only have 2, depending on a number of different constraints. So based on that, we're going to use a little bit of that information and then some creative land planning strategies to effectively put 2 triplexes on 2 townhouse sized lots and make that site function as it should. So that's the goal for tonight, and we'll kick it off. So yep, perfect, beautiful. So I'm an investor in Durham region and the surrounding area. I got started in 2012 with a bank sale property. My wife and I bought this fixer-upper bank sale property, and my realtor at the time, we bought it for 260 grand, which is crazy today. My realtor at the time was like, I can get you a house in Oshawa that's fixed and done for the same price. And I'm like, no. We want a project. We want a couple acres of land, which we got. And we want the fixer upper type of lifestyle. And at the time, we didn't know anything about construction or real estate at all. Like it was literally just a principal residence. And we didn't know numbers. We didn't know like anything other than like, how much is this mortgage going to cost us every month? And what does that actually mean? So in terms of, getting started, it was like, where do we get lumber? Where do we get paint? Where do we get all of the things that all of the people in this group probably already know what they cost and where to get them, and that was such a learning curve for us and for me, as what then eventually grew into the business, which is part of the surrounding area. So just after 2012, bought my first rental property in Oshawa. It was a non-legal fixer-upper basement apartment property, like a bungalow type of thing. My realtor calls me up and she's like, hey, do you trust me? I was like, what do you mean? Like this realtor's trying to sell me something, right? And I was like, okay, I trust you. What do you got? And she was like, well, come check out this property. If you like it, buy it. If you don't. I'm like, okay. So I go, I check the property out, and it was a great deal. Again, it was in like the 200s. We sold it 6 months later in the 300s and made some really good money. And I realized then, I was like, wow, I made more money flipping this rental property that I held for a year than I did working my 9 to 5 for the whole year. And I just did this evenings and weekends. So it was around that time that I got laid off, and, the business was born. Next, I'm a professional nothing. So just like Ali alluded to at the beginning of the presentation for himself and for the group, I too am a professional nothing. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a mortgage broker. I'm not a realtor. I am none of these things. I have none of these accreditations. What I do have is real world experience, real world boots on the ground experience. So I take what all of these people tell me and I assemble these things that we call deals, right? That's what makes me an investor. Over the years, I've owned and controlled or otherwise acquired 70 properties. Some of those are flips, rentals, multifamily, land development deals, things like this. I've got 33 units of new development in the pipeline right now and a portfolio of roughly 14 million bucks. As Ali mentioned, I've got a #1 best-selling book on Amazon called The Highest and Best Use Playbook. That was a ton of fun to write. We could talk about it later, but it was a really cool thing to write. You teach yourself things when you write it down too. So that was a great bonus. Podcast host, we mentioned that. And I also did some TV work with HGTV. Okay, so enough about me, a little bit more about you. Topics of tonight. So what we're, 1. There you go. So there should be 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's a fresh slide deck. So what we're going to talk about first is the 4 languages of real estate. This is something that I came up with in addition to the whole highest and best use concept. And it's something that I really realized over the years that made me a successful investor. So I want to share those with you guys. We're going to follow that up with what is an easement or right of way, so we can actually define it. And then I'm going to kick it out with real world examples with a site plan of 2 triplexes that I'm actually doing today. Okay. I only talk about things that I've done. I think that that's a really important thing to know. Obviously I speak really quickly because I'm really passionate about this. And I think that it's important to only speak about the things that you've done, because it's not fluff. It's not concepts. It's the real thing, right? This is the real deal. So I'm going to talk about this in real time. I'm actively going through this deal as we speak, and it has been approved. So I can actually talk about it for real. We're going to follow that up with Q&A. So if you guys have any questions as we go, because it's Zoom style, put them in the chat. I don't know. Will I see them? Ali, is comments turned on? Will I see them pop up as we go?
Yeah, you should be able to see them, or I can moderate that as well.
Okay, so put them in the chat. If I can answer them as we go, I'll try. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And if not, we'll blast them all out at the end. And I'm a totally open book too, by the way. So if you guys have a question related to the presentation, great. And if you have something that's unrelated to the presentation, I'm totally happy to answer whatever questions you guys may have.
Sounds good.
Next slide. Okay, so 4 languages of real estate. Oh man, 1 again. Rack. Okay, 4 languages of real estate. So I really love this. I came up with this maybe 5 years or so ago, and I've never really shared it with anybody until Ali asked me to speak tonight. And I was like, you know what? Maybe now's a good time. So you guys are seeing this like for the very first time, like right out of the brain. The 4 languages of real estate break down like this: real estate, finance, construction, and design. One more time: real estate, finance, construction, and design. Real estate itself is actually a language that I don't think enough people pay attention to. So we're going to break that down and what it means. Finance, same thing. It's all about the money. Construction is construction. What can you build? And the last is design. I believe that emotion and design really do drive value. So I want to touch on that. So those 4 things make you a rockstar investor. So we'll start with real estate being number one, primarily the first and foremost. So zoning, what can you put on the dirt? I've said for a while, what you make on the dirt is what you make on the deal, right? The zoning is so important because if you don't know what you can put on that piece of land, A, how do you know what you're going to build? And the other three things below, that we're going to talk about don't matter. But B, like that's where the value comes from, density and parking and setbacks. And this really dictates all of the things that you could do with that piece of land. So the language of zoning, so critical. Next is the language of legal within the real estate realm. Transacting a property on the way in and on the way out, understanding the way that the lawyers think and what can be legally done with title or the process or money coming in or wire transfers or things like that. Maybe the way that they see your deal, very important. So if you can think like a lawyer, even not necessarily identical to a lawyer, because obviously they were trained to do what they do. But if you can understand their thought process and you can understand the way that they may process your deal in and out, right? It'll help you think the way that they do, which will only benefit you short-term and long-term. Next, we have the transactional side. So this would be your realtors, your brokers, your agents, things like this, your sales agents. If you can think like a realtor sometimes, that might help you buy off market. That might also help you buy on market, right? So for me, I've always bought traditionally 50% off market, 50% on market, and I almost exclusively sell with an agent. If there's any agents on the call, I think a lot of agents, they get fleeced for comps and all these things all the time. And you have to support these people if you want them to be there for you, time and time again. It's really important. So I'm a big believer in buying off market or buying on market and always selling on the open market because I think that's where you get the best resale value and that's where you get the most exposure. So that's really important. Learning how to think for the transactional process in terms of paperwork, in terms of, the legal side on how they meet that paperwork is very important, right? And that goes for both the purchase and the sale. So very important there. Trends. What is taking place in the real estate market today? It doesn't matter what happened in the 70s. It doesn't matter what happened in the 90s, right? That doesn't matter. What matters is what's happening today and in the future, because we can't go back. Now we can learn from the past. That's really important. Right? You hear a lot of people talk about mortgage rates in the 80s, like, oh, I paid like 18% on my mortgage. And that's great. It's great to learn these things, but we can't do anything with that today. All we can do is use it as a word of caution or as a word of advice, right? And move ahead. So, our work live space is going to be the next trend in terms of physical. Our different types of, layouts going to be the next trend. Our different areas going to be the next trend. These are trends in the language of real estate that are very, very important. Lastly, and obviously there's way more, but I just took a handful of them. Lastly is investment stream. So, obviously this is a group of builders and developers. So, we all really know, what are we interested in? Like, are we builders? Are we developers? Are we both, right? They're very different streams. But I think there's a lot of folks out there that are into the multifamily space. There's also folks out there that are into the flipping, the duplex, the wholesale, the rent to own. Like, these are all within the realm of real estate, but they're all very different businesses at their core. So really understanding the language of real estate is extremely critical. And that's where we're going to leave that one. And now we're going to move on to finance. So the language of finance, this is all about the dollars. This is all about the money, right? This is really this is the oil and the lubrication that really makes the whole system work. First, second, and third mortgages, totally critical. So if you're going to put a first lender or a second lender or a third lender on your deal, how does that actually take place, right? Is it registered? Is it non-registered? We're going to talk about prom notes in a minute. Is it coming from an A lender where there's no fees? Is it coming from a B lender where there is fees, right? Finance, first, second, third mortgages, super important. And what's really cool, I think a lot of people, when they hear the term second or third mortgage, they get really freaked out, whether you're the lender or the borrower or whatever. But if you think about it contextually, what is the loan to value of those mortgages? And is it really as negative as people sometimes make it out to be? If you got, for example, if you got a first mortgage of 10% loan to value on the property, that's very low risk. If you have a second mortgage of an additional 10%, now you're 20% loan to value. Well, what if you put a third mortgage on there of 8%? Your total loan to value on that property is 28%. But people think oh my gosh, you got 3 mortgages on the property. Contextually, we really have to step back and say, okay, what does that mean? Loan to value, risk, who's the borrower, and so on. Because a good investor will turn around a bad deal, but a bad investor will screw up a good deal. And it doesn't matter what the loan to value is, right? So something to really keep in mind. BTBs, huge. my favorite. I love VTBs. I bought lots of buildings and properties with VTBs over the years. Typically as a first mortgage, sometimes as a second, interest-only payments, balloon payments, all of this. The way that you structure a VTB, super critical, super important. I did a deal. It was a multifamily deal 2-3 years ago. Did really, really well on it. And I took a 2-year VTB from the seller, 17% down, so 83% loan to value. And I got that at 4% as the first mortgage because nobody else would finance it, right? Like the bank wouldn't pick it up because the property was completely smashed. Right? And I said, I'm going to go in. This is my business plan. And the seller was like, yeah, cool. I get it. Right. She deferred her taxes for a couple of years on the capital gain. I got a great rate and great terms. I also got a great price. Sometimes you get terms, sometimes you get price, and the VTB can really be the hinge there. So understanding finance, really important with respect to VTBs. Prom notes, so freaking dangerous right now in the market. If you don't know what you're doing, there's a lot of people that get over leveraged on prom notes, especially with the market shifting the way that it has. You've got to be very, very careful and very, very delicate as a borrower and as a lender with prom notes. Like there's a lot of people getting great interest rates with a prom note, right? Because it's unsecured, and that's fine as long as somebody makes good on that note. But I'm of the opinion that you're investing in the borrower first. The property is kind of inconsequential. Like whether it's on the back of a matchbox, a napkin, or a prom note, it pretty much means the same thing. So we got to be very careful on the way that we're seeing this, right? And the way that you're actually utilizing those funds. I'm of the opinion that you should only utilize those funds if you're responsible with the way that they're being delegated, and as if they were your own, right? Very important. Lastly, commercial residential. So commercial financing versus residential financing, very different streams. Obviously in the residential space, you've got people that, or the banks pretty much just pay for their own fees, right? It's great. There's really no fees from an A lender. Whereas in the commercial side, 1%, 2%, 3%, depending on how you're borrowing, and the qualification criteria are very different. So that's the language of finance with respect to the way that we're building and developing. Construction, one of my faves. What are we building? This is the language of construction. If you roll up on site and your builder or your whoever you're working for or working with knows that you don't know, you're going to get fleeced. So either have somebody that you trust and know and like and appreciate working with that does know something about construction, or know it yourself intuitively. Because if you don't know what you're talking about, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. You could be in the restaurant industry, real estate, it doesn't matter, right? Like if you don't know what you don't know, it's going to become a problem, especially with respect to budgets. So this kind of ties into finance, obviously, but like, what do things cost? Like, does anybody ever spend the time to just go to Home Depot, which I hate, by the way, it's the terrible use of time, lowest and worst use of time. Go to Home Depot and just be like, okay, what does it cost to renovate my bathroom? Toilet's $200, the faucet's $119, 6 boxes of tile is like $10, $6, $4 a square foot, depending on what you buy. And a tub is $200 to $1,000. Put that in a spreadsheet. Boom. If you're a new investor, that's really going to help you get rolling, whether you're building new construction or doing a renovation, right? These are one of the lowest risk ways to understand budget and what things actually cost. Process. Very critical. You don't paint your drywall before you hang it. If you said to somebody you could do that and save time, they'll think you're crazy. So you don't do that, right? You have to know the process. Building multifamily is very different in terms of fire code, for example, than building single family. The fire separations are different. When I first got started, I didn't really know that, right? I was like, oh, let's put the drywall up. Like, what's the big deal? No. There's a process. The ducting has to go after the drywall. The rock salt has to go in the wall a certain way. Very important to know the process, especially if you're your own GC, right? Over the last 7 years, I had full-time staff, so they relied on me. They said, hey, how do we do this? And I had to learn. I had to know, right? And at the very beginning of my career, I really didn't know. So I progressively learned, right? Which led me to the next thing, which is building code. Don't read the building code. It's like, oh my God, it's so big. It's the Bible. It's like, just have a general understanding. There's professionals that know the stuff, your designers, your BCIN, your engineers, things like this. They'll get you out of the weeds, but generally just have a good idea on the way that the wind blows for building code. So when you go to your job site, everything looks to be about right. Lastly is the job site. We kind of talked about that. Don't get fleeced, know what you're talking about. And lastly is the design. So one of the stories that I talk about in the book is the yellow house story. So, and I'll give it here. Basically, let's say, as builders and developers, we're going to build a house. We buy a parcel of land. We're going to put up a 3-bed, 2-bath, 2-story home. Now, let's say after that house gets built, we proceed to paint everything bright yellow. like everything, like the shingles, the walls, the toilet, the floors, like everything bright yellow. A prospective buyer may come into that house and say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I see that you've built this house and it's brand new, but it's ugly. So I'm going to give you less than asking price. Conversely, if you build that same house, right, and everything is color coordinated and it's beautiful and the hardwood's lovely and the toilet isn't yellow, it's this nice porcelain and the chandeliers are hanging from the ceiling, architectural shingle, and it's nicely done. Somebody spent the time. Somebody might come into that property and say, wow, I see what you've done with this place and it's beautiful. This property touches my soul. I will pay you over asking. The difference is that the design really changes the perspective of the buyer because it touches their emotion, which is what drives value in a property. Just because you built the house doesn't mean that it's worth a certain amount, right? It has to touch the buyer's soul. So the difference there isn't the fact that we built it. It's the fact that we spent the time to make it beautiful. And that's really what's going to drive the value. The money necessarily isn't in the construction. It's in planting the dirt and in the design. The construction just gets you there, but it's very important to understand that up front. So color, emotion, layout, very, very critical. If you're a realtor, I mean, gosh, you'd know this better than anybody. You go into a property and you think, there's something off about this, right? Because you've seen so many homes, you just know there's something off. Conversely, you go into something that's really well done and you go, oh, this feels right. This feels like home, right? The value's there. So very important. Emotion is what's going to drive the dollars, and it's going to drive the buyers to your property. And that's what's really driving the value in these homes. So next slide, Ali. Easements. Okay. So using the 4 languages of real estate, now that we understand what they mean and how we can drive value to the dirt, value to the structure, value to yourself, like, what are you good at? Let's talk a little bit about easements and right-of-ways, and I'll overly simplify it so that we can get it really, really like get the core guts of it nailed down, and then we can apply it to the site plan that we're going to talk about ahead. Okay, I'm going to read this word for word. An easement is an agreement to let someone else use your land, and this is also known as air rights, utility infrastructure, or encroachments. Okay. So an easement, again, is an agreement to let somebody else use your land for varying purposes. And a right-of-way is also considered a form of an easement. And it's an easement agreement to let someone else travel upon, over, or along your land for access. Okay. So if anybody on this call has a mutual driveway or been to a property with a mutual driveway, maybe it's in a big city, that's one example of an easement. Another example would be a cottage road. So there's lots of cottages in cottage country that have a road that's shared by like 25 neighbors or 3 neighbors or some variation, right? That's an easement, believe it or not. You're driving on what is known as an easement. Now, these can sometimes, excuse me, these can sometimes come in the form of a registered easement or right-of-way, or they can be unregistered. So years ago, early 2000s, when they converted from, at least in Ontario, when they converted from the land registry system, which was the old way to own property, to the land title system, which is the new way, the modern way to own property. There was all kinds of like unregistered mutual driveways and cottage roads, and it was like a total mess, right? And if anybody's heard the term squatters' rights, the technical term for that is called adverse possession. So adverse possession back in the day, which doesn't exist anymore, adverse possession used to mean if you were using this thing for a long time and you could prove it, it was yours. And it's like, it's almost like unfathomable, but I've heard of so many cases. And I actually had a lawyer, he's in Toronto, his name's Bob Aaron. He was on the podcast a while ago and his episode got released today. And he talks about this, like the way that title was registered and different types of easements and air rights and things like this. And it's just like, it's incredible how things have changed over the years. You can't just go and like expropriate your neighbor anymore, where before you could be like, that's my driveway, right? So things have really changed over the years with respect to the way that easements are registered and the way that cottage roads operate and things like this. So that's what we're going to talk about here next with the site plan. So Ali, if you can go to the next slide, we'll see how these easements actually function. Okay, so what we're looking at here is, it's a quasi, I kind of modified this just for the purpose of the presentation, but it's like a survey meets an art plan, meets a site plan, and all of the above. And I've color coded it so that it's easy to point out. I'm sure a lot of people on the call have seen something like this in the past. This lot is 20 meters wide, 39.71 or 40.06. We'll just call it 40 meters deep. And what I did with this property was I bought it 2 years ago, something like that. And it's kind of a funny story, I'll tell you. So I was doing a renovation like 5 doors down. And at lunchtime, I was like, well, I got a little bit of free time. I don't have a lot going on. I'm just going to walk the street and drop off some flyers, right? Make use of my lunch break and, I don't know, drop off some flyers. So I was walking around and I dropped off some flyers to like the crappiest houses on the block, which is a lot of fun. And walking up to these houses is always kind of daunting because you're like, I wonder if they're home. I wonder if they're not home. Should I knock? Should I leave a call me note? Like, what do I do? So I left a bunch of notes with the expectation that nobody would probably call because, 1 in like 100 is actually due. So a couple of years goes by and the phone rings and I pick it up. I'm like, hello. And it's this agent on the other end. And I said, can I help you? And they said, well, we're looking for Ryan Carr. And I said, well, this is he. And they said, Ryan, do you remember this particular street in Durham? You dropped off a bunch of flyers and, there was this house of a certain character. Do you remember that house? And I said, actually, I do. I do remember this house. It was like Robin's Egg Blue and you couldn't miss it, right? And they said, well, we got your flyer a couple of years ago and I'm representing the seller and she'd like to sell to you. And I was like, come on, like 2 years later, are you kidding me? This I didn't say this to the guy, but I was like, 2 years later, this is great. Yeah, sure. Like, tell me the details, how much, when and where. So I went, I saw the place and this particular seller had some criteria that I was able to meet. We agreed on a price and obviously the house needed a ton of work. But that's how this property came about. And what was interesting about it is that the zoning on this particular one was different than both of the neighbors. So the neighbor to my left had different zoning. The neighbor to my right had different zoning. And I had this really cool preferential zoning that before Bill 23 actually mattered. Like you couldn't just go and build triplexes willy-nilly like you kind of can now. The zoning here really, really mattered. So that's how I acquired the property. And when I did, I realized, okay, we got a big lot. It's deep. I want to get as many units as I can on it. How can I get highest and best use here? How can I achieve that? So in our case, 2 triplexes with this creative strategy of easements that we're going to talk about next came about. So I'm going to tell you basically how the site plan shakes down. So what we have here in yellow will be building lots. Okay, so we got a left building lot and a right building lot. And then what we have down the middle is 2 green strips that will effectively become the driveway. Okay, so building lot on the left, building lot on the right, driveway down the middle, and you can see on the top of the screen, that's where the street is located, which would naturally mean the parking is at the back. Okay. Something else that's interesting in the way that they've highlighted this on the survey is where the existing house was and the existing garage was. Now, oftentimes, highest and best use really comes down to what can I do with the existing structure, right? Land, structure, personal skills. Those are the 3 things that we're looking at. Do I take the house down? Do I not take the house down? How can I split the lot? What am I good at? So because the house was like right in the middle of the friggin' lot, I couldn't save the house and I couldn't pick the house up and move it because it was like literally just too wide. So the house had to come down. If I could have saved the house, I most definitely would have. It had a little bit of character to it. It was kind of Victorian in nature, but by no means was it historic. But you could have maybe jazzed it up that way, but it definitely wasn't historic. So I realized, you know what? House has to go. Let's do 2 triplexes. I can't save the house. The garage comes down too, and we're going to split the lot. So that's effectively what happened, right? I took the site plan that you see and I sent it to the city and I said, hey, what do you guys think? Triplex on the left, triplex on the right, build them as single family homes and progressively add more units so that you can save the development charges, right? That was a technique before that was like not even mainstream and now it's slowly becoming more mainstream with Bill 23. But, before that's how we did it, right? So they said, yeah, we kind of like this. I thought, right. They had a little bit of pushback at the top where you can see the road widening on the survey. That's the white bar that's about 1.5 meters tall. So in each corner, they highlighted those like cloud looking bubbles and they said, no, we need more of a road widening 2.5 meters for this particular site to make the street function and meet code, which I wasn't super thrilled about, to be, completely honest and transparent, because like nobody else on the street has a road widening taken from them. So sometimes you can actually push back against this. So for anybody going through development, if the city's going to take a road widening from you, ask them not to. You can say, do you guys have any plans to redevelop this road? Do you guys have any plans to expropriate the rest of the neighbors? What is that going to cost? Millions of dollars. Are you ever going to actually do it? And if they say, no, not really, well, then maybe you can get away with not doing the road widening. And in this case, if we didn't do the road widening, I could have actually put a parking space in front of the house, which would have given us more parking than I have. So I may still push back on it. We'll see. But basically, they've approved it right now with the 2.5 meter road widening, which I lose land. It's effectively expropriation without compensation, but that's pretty much the only way that you can do it in this circumstance. So that's what it is. That's the way that the site is going to function. And there's a more detailed one in the next slide. But before I move on, just a couple quick points for anybody that's maybe less familiar with the way that a survey actually reads or what it means. So obviously you can see the way that I've broken down the colors just to make it simple to understand. But in the bottom left corner, for example, yep, exactly right there. That is 8.48. That's the rear lot line on how wide it is for that particular parcel. Slightly to the left of that, there's a little white box. That white box denotes where the vertical and the horizontal property lines actually meet. Now, if you look at that one as a little white box and you go all the way to the top of the screen, there's a little black box. Basically, those mean the same thing. That's where the property lines meet, but they're very different, right? One could be a short iron bar. The other could be a long iron bar or some variation thereof. And now, like that was back in the day, now they use plastic stakes with magnets on top. So that's how they're locating properties. Generally speaking, when they hammer in an iron bar, it's like 2 to 4 feet long. So it never really disappears. It's always there unless somebody actually physically removes it. And just for a giggle, if you can, I did this a couple weeks ago because it was a ton of fun. Go to the rental store and try and rent a magnet detector specific for survey stakes. It's like this long, almost looks like a hockey stick, and it's got like a magnet metal detector thing on the end, and it beeps when you get close to your survey stake. And it's kind of cool to actually know that your fence is or isn't on your property boundary. If you're buying a property, you can kind of find out specifically, geographically, where is it located? Where can you put your parking? And, you can mark it with paint. And it's just kind of a fun exercise. We have a cottage and I did this. So like walking around the forest with this thing, trying to like the town crier ringing a bell, you know what I mean? Trying to find a survey stake was hilarious, but it was fun to see where the boundaries actually go and how much property you have and so on and so forth. So a rental fee for that thing is like $30. So if you're looking for something to do, check that out. Let's go to the next slide, Ali. Okay. So this one here, slightly more detailed version of what we just saw, but now you can see specifically how the site is going to function. So this was a grading plan that I literally put in Photoshop and like removed as much as I could to make it less confusing, because grading plans can be really confusing and a lot going on. So what you see here, again, is more detailed version of the way that the easement is going to function. So we've got the 2 triplexes in blue, one on the left side, one on the right. We've got the green drive aisle, 2 pieces, and I'll explain why that's important in a minute, going down the middle. And then we got parking at the back, 4 spaces for each side. Now, what's really important to know about the easement, one of the ways that I pitch this to the city is I want to put in a mutual driveway, and this is why I want to do it. And they're like, okay, we kind of like that idea, but like, what about doing a 6-plex instead of 2 triplexes with an ingress on one side and an egress on the other? And I was like, well, guys, there's 8 cars using this driveway on a daily basis. Like, this isn't the 401. You know what I mean? Land is becoming very, very dear. And if you let me build it in this regard, I can actually afford to do it because the development credits are more important than building one 6-plex with no development credits other than on, maybe the second unit. So by doing 2 triplexes, I'm building 3 units on one side, 3 units on the other, with the common down the middle, but the development credits are there. You're only paying for the single. And that is so important. That is a total highest and best use technique. On 6 units, at least in the city, we would probably pay $40,000 a unit over and above the single. So like 40,000 on 6, 12, 18, that's 250 grand in DCs, right? That's more than most people would make on a build, depending on the margin and depending on the scale. So like, if you can get 3 and 3 as opposed to 1 6 unit, and you're creative with the way that easement functions, right? Now we're able to make use of the dirt and also make the property function. And we're also able to eliminate things like noise. Like if you put 3 units instead of 6, well, if you have a problem in one building with something, that doesn't transpose into the other. So that's really important. Okay, so back to the easement. So one of the things that's really important with these easements is the way that they're registered and the way that they function. So this is like peanut butter and jelly. The triplex on the left owns half the easement and the triplex on the right owns the other. What you do when you actually register these is one easement is registered as a reciprocal easement to the other building, and the other easement is registered as a reciprocal easement to the other building, right? Peanut butter and jelly. You have to put them both together to get a fully functioning driveway that is legally registered to title through a land division committee or some type of committee in your city. And what's really important here is that everybody is able to travel along the land, upon or over it, and they're not able to block it because it's registered on title. It's legit. It's done with lawyers. Okay. Also, the easement stays with the property, not with the owner. Very important. In the old days, if some owner moved out and somebody else bought the property, the squatter's rights or adverse possession no longer took place, right? You have to show a perpetual history of using that thing. And if you sell the property without registering that, it disappears. In this case, when we're doing it legally and legit, these easements stay with the property, not with the owner. So again, very important. That's how all 8 tenants or all 6 tenants plus 2 guest spots are going to access the rear, and nobody can block it. So again, this is a grading plan, a little bit more detail. We don't have to talk about all of the specificities within it, but generally speaking, this is the way that I've planned this parcel. And again, this is 6 units. And what I love about it is we can now go to CMHC because it's 6 units, 3 and 3. And since the lot lines are joining, we can finance it commercially. So like, it's one thing to say I built the triplex, but then like, how do you get your money back? You know, what's your ROI on that? But if you do 2, now you have the benefits of the DCs. You've put 2 triplexes on 2 townhouse sized lots, and you've got functional parking, which then creates the highest and best use. Okay. So what we're going to do now, we're going to break into some Q&A. Now you guys have seen the way that I'm planning this. You can go to the next slide, Ali. What I would love for you guys to do, please, 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 is go to the highestandbestuse.com and sign up for my newsletter, right? Every now and again, I send out a newsletter. I don't send out trash. I don't send out garbage. I am an active investor. So if there's something like, and that is my main business. So like, if there's something good for me to send out, there's probably a reason for it, right? Whether it's a book release or an audiobook coming out. We just converted the highest and best use to audiobooks. So that's going to be coming out soon as well. So if you don't want to get the paper copy, which I think you should, because it's better, then, you know, you're able to flip through it. If you prefer the audiobook, that's cool too. But we've got apps coming out, you know, podcast notifications, lots of free content. So if you could, I'd really appreciate it. Sign up at thehighestandbestuse.com. Next slide. And here's all my contact info. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, take a screen grab of this, or Ali, maybe you can post it wherever you post the videos after the fact. But I'm on Instagram, Facebook, email, podcast, website, books, all this stuff. This is where you can find me. So again, I'm Ryan Carr. Thank you guys so much for having me out tonight. This has been a lot of fun. It's fun sharing things that I'm doing. And, you know, obviously I keep tabs on what people in the group are doing as well. And again, thank you, Ali, for having me out, and Mary for planning this event. So this was great.
Thank you, Ryan. That was amazing. Thank you so much. And thanks for being here. This was really interesting. I'm sure everybody got a lot out of it, and really interesting. Like, and the fact that this is your live deal, that you know, makes it very interesting right now. So ton of questions I have,
Good.
but I'll you know, won't abuse my position and you know, go to the chat. So first question is, would it be better to build both triplexes before severing, or sever the lots first?
Sure. So that really comes down to zoning. Because this is apartment building zoning, like traditionally, you could build them at the same time and then sever after. I chose to go through a process called part lot control. So part lot control is a technical way to sever land at the municipal level instead of having to go to the regional level, provided that the parcel is on a registered plan of subdivision. So it's technical, obviously in nature, but I chose to sever it first so that I knew exactly what I was going to get, because I knew I wasn't going to build it right away. Like, I rented this house for a little bit before I took it down. So I just went through the process of the severance during that rental. Then I took it down. Then I'm going to build them both at the same time. But I wanted to really know, because this was pre-Bill 23, if you build them as a single and then start successively adding units, sometimes your setbacks can change. And the city might say, well, you know, you built it with a 1.2 setback. We want to see a 1.8 setback on the side yard. And then you're stuck. right? So I wanted to know upfront, okay, this is the site, this is the plan. I didn't want to try to like pull the wool over the city's eyes because it's just never good. You only get one reputation. And I think that that's more important than trying to, weasel your way into a deal and then people are upset. So this is the way that I chose to do it. And that's why.
So what you're saying is like each lot is zoned for a triplex. This is pre-built 23.
This is pre-built 23. So obviously triplexes are classed as an apartment building, right? As soon as you cross that two unit threshold, then you're considered an apartment. So that means the setbacks change. So in this particular site, if I built a single, like this had multi-purpose zoning. So I could have built a duplex, apartment building. I could have built 3 towns. I could have built a whole bunch, right? And the reason that I did it this way was because Bill 23 wasn't even a thing, right? So as soon as I built the single at maybe like, let's say a 1.2 meter side yard setback, if I added the second unit, it would have been fine. But then when I went into the third unit, they might've said, well, now you're an apartment building, move the building, right? You're not in compliance and we won't give you the variance to make it so. Now things are very different. So it was all about compliance and making sure that I was upfront about it before I went in any further.
So you took a larger setback as if it was an apartment when you get the approval for this.
Yeah, I wanted a smaller setback. Like, frankly, I'd actually like to make this driveway a little bit wider, and I probably will by shrinking up the building, because this was a 3-meter drive aisle, which will fit. It'll function. It's just tough for snow plowing. So if this was the only option, I would do it. But if it wasn't the only option and I could get 3.5 meters or 12 feet, 12 feet's better. It's nicer. You can get a bigger truck down, for moving and so on. I would do it either way, but a 12-foot is better. So if I can take that from the side yard setback, instead of a 1.5, I get a 1.2. That's what I'll do.
Okay, that makes sense. And then next question, is asking, who's the best at the city to argue the road widening? City wants 5 meters at my site.
Gotcha. So I don't know your city specifically, obviously, so we can just speak in generalities. Usually the person that you speak to about your pre-consultation would be a good go-to. The planner that's on that file would be a good go-to. Your municipal or regional counselor would be a good go-to. Like, if you can't get it on paper through like your planner, then go political, right? Talk to the mayor. Say, hey, nobody else on the street's going to widen this thing. Why would I have to widen it? Why am I giving you extra land when you're never going to do anything with it in the next 50 years, right? There's nothing in the works. And by the way, if you let me put one more parking spot, maybe that allows me to put one more unit, right? So if you can come up with some kind of a reason other than just saying like, I want to be difficult and I just don't want to give it to you, then I think that's going to be better than just putting you're putting your stick in the mud and being like, no. So come up with a reason that benefits the city, benefits your budget, and benefits the greater for humanity, and you're going to have more likelihood of success.
Makes sense. Awesome. Dan, go ahead.
Hey, Ryan.
Hey, Dan.
Thanks for the talk. Never thought I'd see the day someone came on and talked about easements, but it's really appreciated. So I'm in a scenario right now. So I ended up cutting 2 lots off of 2 properties. I built semis there. I posted about it. You might have seen it. And I ended up building a mammoth retaining wall that spans 3 properties. So it spans my new property. And then I technically stuck the wall on the 2 existing properties to get more frontage out of my new lots. So when I went ahead and did this, to my surprise, the city actually didn't say a thing about the retaining wall as far as like easements and whatnot goes. So I've got this huge retaining wall. It spans 3 properties. It's fine right now, but we all know that can shift in 15 years, whatever, and needs some work. So in my estimation, it's up to me whether I want to approach the city and put an easement on there. So my first question is, could I get your thoughts on kind of preemptively and voluntarily doing an easement for something like that?
Yeah, my quick answer is I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't know how the city is going to view an easement for a retaining wall. My first thought as you were describing it was like, well, maybe it's just like a fence, both neighbors kind of sharing the cost. I don't know the answer to that. The easement I was talking about here tonight obviously was for transportation, and there was a mutual benefit to it. The wall would have a mutual benefit too. I just don't know what type of reciprocity that would actually mean. You know what I mean? Like, the person that's higher would technically say, well, you could you could argue that their land is caving in on the lower parcel. And then the person that's on the lower parcel might say, well, that's my wall. I don't know. I don't really know how that's played. I would probably have a conversation with the municipal planner that did your file. I would also ask for a second opinion on that, because my opinion is probably not enough in this situation.
Yeah, fair enough. It's just my thinking is if it ever has to be worked on, there's no two ways around it. You're going to need access to all three properties. So that was kind of.
Oh, okay. So this is more so about access to repair, or?
Yeah, like again, the wall should be fine for a long, long time, but we've all seen a retaining wall that's shifted over time, right? And if that were to happen here, again, you are going to need physical access on all three of those properties to repair it.
Yeah. I don't know the real answer to this, but I can just give you a hunch on maybe the way that I would approach it, but definitely get some professional like engineering advice. I don't think that an easement would be necessarily required in this situation, because I mean, like for people with a 1.2 meter setback that can't get to their own backyard with an excavator, you'd be knocking on your neighbor's door to say, hey, can I use your driveway? So I don't think that this is really an easement circumstance personally, but again, I don't know.
I think it's a voluntary thing that if I want to own these properties for a long time, then maybe I go ahead and do it. You know what I mean? I don't think there's any obligation that I do it, but I can see some sense in doing it. And, a follow-up to that, I've dealt with a ton of easements over the years. I've removed easements, but I've actually never established one. And I've certainly never established one after the fact. In this scenario here, am I going to the COA to do this? Am I talking to engineering? Like what avenue are you going through to get an easement established?
Yeah, so easements are typically done through whoever handles your land division applications. So in my circumstance, this was Durham. So Durham Region Land Division Committee handles, they handle like right-of-ways, they handle easements, they handle land leases, 21 years or more. They handle the actual land division application itself. So I believe that you should be looking to whatever committee handles your land division.
For you then, was your establishing your easement part of the public COA process?
No, well, not COA. Like committee of adjustment for us here is more so related to minor variances and less or so related to land division applications. Like land division applications and things of that nature do have a public process, so you can comment, so to speak. But I mean, the C of A for us is different. I think every municipality, depending on the size of them, they're going to operate slightly differently. Like I just did one in a smaller town where it didn't even go to a committee. It went to council. Yep. So it was, everybody's going to be a little bit different, but just to ask whatever planners in the office, say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Who do I speak with?
Okay. Sounds good. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Great conversation. Van?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I actually wanted to talk to Dan. Dan, I think you should be talking to your lawyer, but do you own all three of those lots that you're proposing to put the easement on?
Yeah, I own all three of the lots, the retaining walls there. And yeah, honestly, a lawyer was probably going to be my first conversation.
Yeah, if you own the land, I mean, you may have to talk to the committee, but I doubt it, to be honest. It's your land. If you want to register an easement against it to the benefit of because you're just registering it to the benefit of the other landowners in the case you need to do work on the wall, right? Yep, so I would have my first conversation would be with your lawyer, and he or she will tell you if you need to talk to anybody else, but for sure you need to talk to them, and they're going to be the people that register it for you. If it's all your land, you may not have to talk to anybody else.
Appreciate that.
And I'll qualify just like Ryan did. I'm not a lawyer. That's not my area of expertise, but I know from conversations with my lawyer about easements that I have to put on land that if it's not tied to a severance or anything else that would force you to go to the committee, you probably don't have to.
I appreciate that, Dan. The lawyer was going to be first up, so I appreciate you reiterating that.
All right.
Awesome. Great chat. Ina.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Ryan, amazing conversation. Thank you. I'm actually, for the first time, dealing with easements, so this is just perfect. So I wanted to get your take on it. So we had a pre-con for we're doing a 42 unit development, and basically my site is facing a main road, and behind the site, there's a big development coming in as well. There's like 300 units coming in. The city basically told me that they don't want me accessing my lots from the road that they're facing because of traffic and it's on a hill and all of that. So they want me to actually ask the development behind me for what I'm assuming would be an easement to, like, for them to allow access to my sites from their road that will be built. Like, it's not even built yet. They're going through site plan approval.
Mhm.
And again, never dealt with anything like this. I was hoping to kind of get your take on, would you do something like this, or would you, go through all the studies and everything that might be necessary and fight for access off of the main road? Or would you go through the big development and kind of what would you ask them for? Like, any things for me to be aware of?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one, because like if they're going through the site plan approval, it's not like you can impose a condition on them, or the city can impose a condition on them saying, we want to give her right of way to get to her site, and and that's it. Like you can't really go from one owner to the other. So really this is just a request between you and the other person, the other owner. Like, would it make your site function better? Maybe, as you say, maybe, sure. Would private access be probably better? Likely, then you control the whole process. I would probably opt for the studies and so on, find a traffic study, traffic engineer that can help justify why your entrance may be suitable for your development. That would be the first outcome that I would try to approach. If they make you put in things like medians and streetlights and stoplights and stop signs and all this stuff, it might become a little bit more cumbersome, because they can't do that. You're into site plan control at 42 units, right? I would also approach the developer too in the meantime and say, hey, this is what's happening. I'm building, you're building. What do you think about this? And maybe you guys can come up with some type of mutually beneficial arrangement, whether you buy access to that or whether that person gives it to you, or maybe you team up with that developer and say, hey, how about we go in on this together? You build your, however many units, you build your 42 units. Let's go in for higher density, because now we're no longer using one street, or sorry, we're no longer using two streets. We're only using one. Ask for more density and make use of whatever you were going to put in that area where the entry permit would be. Make use of that somehow, right? Maybe you use it for, and I don't know the site specifics, right? But maybe you make the building bigger, the footprint bigger. Maybe you put up a garbage house, so all of the refuse is inside. Maybe you do tenant amenity. Maybe you do more parking. All of these things can become mutually beneficial. And if you can get more parking, maybe you can get more density, because density, net units per net hectare always becomes the battle versus parking. Like, those are always the two biggest constraints. So if you can somehow team up with the developer on the other side and say, hey, let's do this together, then you can both go in and say, hey, we're both going to get more because we're both going to comply with the city. That's how I would approach it.
And in terms of getting the easement from them, like, so you mentioned it's registered on title and everything like that. Like, is there anything for me to be aware of? Like, if so, they actually didn't, like, my realtor had a conversation with them. They didn't seem to mind necessarily doing this. They were open to the idea, which I was surprised at. But how can this screw me over in the next 20 years?
Sure. So, I mean, if it's going to be registered to title, obviously the lawyers are going to have to do up the verbiage to make sure that it's all locked down proper. But basically this will be subject to and together with both of your properties, theirs and yours. So one will be subject to the other and together with the other, meaning it's reciprocal. So like, they have access to the easement, you have access to the easement. And if they need to access your side at all, they can do that. And you can do vice versa, depending on how the site actually maps out. So I wouldn't be concerned about it. For anybody on the call who's been to like a Home Depot, a Walmart, an LCBO, everybody pulls into those shopping centers using the same entrance and they exit using the same exit, right? All of those properties all have easements over each other, so they can all share a common laneway heading in and heading out. Those are easements. Everybody's driven on it, and some people don't even know, right? So in your case for this development, it would be no different. And in a bigger building like that, I think you're less likely to have somebody blocking the aisleway, especially if there's an entrance and an exit. Just on a bigger building, people just don't do that. On a smaller building like my triplexes, sometimes you can get somebody unloading groceries in the aisleway temporarily, where the other 5 tenants might get upset. But in a bigger building, it's less likely. So I wouldn't be concerned about it.
Okay, thank you.
I think I'll just jump in a little quick there. One opportunity might be if they have asked them to build an access road as well, then now you guys, if you share the driveway, and now you get more of your land that you can build on. So now you're basically, instead of building the road on your own lot and they build their road on their own lot, Now you're sharing the road. So you're only basically dedicating half of that width of the road from your land. So maybe that's why they're also interested. Maybe they have been asked the same thing.
Yeah.
So-
Another thing you can do is you can share catch basins. So a storm connection to a parking lot's really expensive. I have one on the site that we talked about tonight, but like that catch basin in this situation is like 3 feet inside the sidewalk, which is like nothing. And it's 25 grand. Right. So if you guys can share parking lots, or you can butt your parking lots up together such that their parking lot drains into yours and yours drains into theirs, maybe you guys can share some common services, and there'd be a sewer easement as well for that storm connection. And you guys could split the cost. So like, not only might you get more density and a more functional site, now you can also split the cost of the catch basin, because really once the water disappears, like who cares where's it go? Right. But if you guys can amortize that cost together, you're going to save.
Cool. I'll ask one last quick question. If you could elaborate a little bit more on that, when you said you go as a single family and then you add units later to save the development charges. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more, please?
Yeah. So I'll just speak as of current, not necessarily from the past, but as of current, because that's what we're dealing with. What you do is you build a single family home, and then you add the second unit, and then you add the third unit. And the reason that we do that is because for Bill 23 and for accessory apartments, all of these units are accessory to existing, right? If you do it as like from the get-go, you do purpose-built triplex, you're going to pay 3 sets of DCs. But if you build it as a single, you pay 1 DC for the single. When you add the accessory apartment, there's no DC on that. And then when you add the third accessory apartment, there's no DC on that either. Now, what you do is you're building it as if it were a triplex from the get-go on your building permit, but you're not putting in the kitchen, right? Or you're leaving out the sink or something like that. So then when you go back for the second building permit, which is to add the accessory, then you're finalizing the unit, and the same with the third. So what you have to do from the beginning is you have to look to the end and say, okay, start with the end in mind, work backwards. What are we doing with our fire separations? What are we doing with our zoning? What are we doing with the build? What are we doing with the site? What are we doing with the grading? Because single family home grading is very different than 3-unit grading, right? And now that things have changed with site plan control, it's a little bit easier, but always make sure that you start at the end and work your way back. Drywall and fire separations on 3 units are different than they are on 1. So be very conscious of that if this is the method that you're going to go. And again, don't try to pull one over on the building department. It sucks. It's not a good plan. Always be upfront and say, this is what I'm planning to do, right? Can we make sure that everything successively is going to function by the time I get done? Because you don't want to go and rip down walls and cut holes and change fire separations. It's a pain. So just be upfront about it.
You're going to tell them when you go for your building permit that you're going to make these in a unit later, but you're not applying for a second or third unit right now.
100%. And they know, like this is the next trend, right? They know what's happening. Always build it that way. So what I would do and what I do is I'll get my 3-unit plans built out, and then I'll just pen not 3 units. I just pen single family home. And then I just like cross out the sink or something like this. So like everything is there, they know, but it says single family home. And then you can go back and add, So very important to get those
building inspector, because when you go to get your second or third unit, now they have to make sure the fire separation, all that. But if you're all, drywalled and painted and all finished up, is there anything they need to see behind the walls, or do you tell them up front to do the inspection before you drywall and paint?
Yeah. So you're always building to the drawings, right? Whatever's approved is what you're going to build. So if you're building a certain wall assembly, like for example, a triplex that I just did, the wall assembly is slightly different for fire code. Let's say more layers of drywall than a single family home. So you don't build the single family home, you build what's on the plans. And if the inspector is inspecting
Sorry, go ahead.
If the inspector is inspecting your building based on the plans, right? The fire separations are really the only thing that matters in terms of building code and being able to successfully get to 3 units. So since you're building based on the plans, if they're inspecting based on the plans, by the time they go for the second and the third building permit, it's just a formality. They won't even come back to inspect. It's just paperwork at that point because they know you've already built it to code.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Van, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to expand on what Ryan was saying earlier. And I mean, I think it varies from municipality to municipality. But in Ottawa, when you make an application for a building permit, the only time anybody checks for whether you're code compliant is it's like one of the first checks when the drawings go in. When you're actually out in building, all the building officials that see you on site care about is, are you building to the plans? None of those guys, to be blunt, none of those guys give a shit about zoning. They only care that you're building to the building code. As long as you're building it safe, the number of units, that's not their problem. What you're going to do with it in the future, that's also not their problem. They just want you to make sure that when people move in, they're going to be safe. And as long as you, at least, again, speaking only from my experience in Ottawa, as long as you keep the building inspector happy that you're building to code, that you're doing what's on the drawings, and that everything's going to be nice and safe, who lives in the place after, he could care less. Once you get past that plans, the zoning plans examiner, which like in Ottawa anyway, is one of the first guys or girls to see your plans. Once they tick the box and say you're okay to build that, you're green light. Like nobody cares what's going to happen down the road. But I agree with Ryan that the people who look at your plans, they're not stupid, right? The zoning plans examiner knows what you're going to do. But as long as what you're doing now is compliant to zoning, he's going to give you a tick in the box and you're going to go on to the next stage. So just be aware that you need to satisfy him that what you're doing now is okay. He'll see what you're planning to do in the future. He won't care about that. If you reapply or you go through the right steps to add the density later, they're going to be okay with that. At least that's my experience. Others may have a different one.
No, makes sense. Yeah, thanks. Awesome. So I guess that brings us to the end of the presentation Q&A section. Thank you, Ryan, again for being here. This was a really great discussion. I think something that not a lot of people talk about it. So great topic that you picked. And I'm sure everybody got a lot of golden nuggets out of this. So that was awesome. So we're going to move on to our next section, which is deal presentation, if there's any. And then we'll basically just open it up for business updates. And, for those who have been here, we just stick around, talk about our projects and what everybody's working on, and, a little bit of networking and masterminding. And I usually forget to do this, but I'm going to stop the recording now because, for those watching this later, they probably don't need this. So let me do that. And then